You are a warrior.
321 status.
What kind of vehicle is it?
You are the very best your nation has to offer.
911.
Multiple shots fired.
They're asking you to lead.
5. We need a Bearcat.
It's up to us.
For 133, I need somebody that's got a visual on where the shooter is.
You must be sound in mind, body, and spirit.
40 feet, where's the officer down? I have a rescue helicopter that wants to land and help.
This is the podcast that will make you the one.
Copy, running eastbound.
The one that will bring everyone back.
Trouble, we have shot fired. Give me back up now.
Because no one else is coming.
We're going to have an officer shot. 100 block of East Street.
Suspect is down.
This is The Squad Room.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to this episode of The Squad Room. I'm your host, Garrett Sla, and this is a special show. This is our first live event, and you get to listen into a podcast recording that we did with a live studio audience. So if this is your first time listening to the show, The Squad Room is the podcast that helps you navigate the challenging terrain of our demanding careers as law enforcement professionals. I'm an active duty sergeant in Southern California for a sheriff's office, and on this show, we learn tactics and strategies for taking care of ourselves, our family, and our community. This episode was recorded live with an audience down at ProForce, and I want to thank ProForce for not only their hospitality and Mikey and the crew down there being so fantastic, but they're also sponsors of this show. So it's important that if you live in Southern California, you've probably already heard of ProForce or you've heard me talking about them. But if you're looking to get a new firearm, to replace something that's aging on your belt, make sure you hit them up. And make sure you told them that you heard about them on this show. And they have great prices on stuff. And they're open to all first responders and security, not just law enforcement. So they've gotten rid of the wait lines. They do appointments now. And I was down there on a Saturday, and I watched them work like clockwork as they got guys and gals through with their firearms purchases. And it was really cool. And if you're an agency sales rep and you're looking to retire an old firearm and pick up something new like the Peach 320, which is what I carry, or the Glock 17 or the M&P or whatever, ProForce can certainly hook you up with a great deal there as well. Reach out to their sales department at 1-800-367-5855 or email them sales@proforceonline.com. They'll give you a no-pressure, no-obligation quote. And they've done some of the biggest agencies in the country, so I trust me when I say that they can handle the transition of your agency to a new firearm. They do officer buyback programs. They've really got it all figured out. So special thanks to ProForce for hosting this event. It was a lot of fun. Taran Tactical came down. Sight Action Apparel was there. Great to finally meet Danny from Sight Action. Spetz Holsters was there. Fantastic group of people. Just had a great time talking with my guest today. And my guest, two guests actually. This was my first studio audience recording. It was my first recording in person with two people, and also my first dispatcher is on the show. And she goes on social medias as at Dispatcher Kristen. Kristen and Aram Cho work together, and they also have their own podcast, 911 Strong. That's where you can find Aram on social media. He is quite the up-and-comer. And they have their own podcast, and she co-hosts. So she joined us for this conversation. We talked about her life and in dispatch and how she tries to remain healthy as a dispatcher, and she's married to an officer as well. So I've always wanted to have a dispatcher on and talk with a dispatcher. It's been hard to find one that wants to come on the air and talk, which is ironic because they talk on the air all day long, now that I think about it. But anyway, Aram and Kristen were fantastic guests. They were super, I really appreciate the effort they took to get there. Aram is one of the leaders in social media for law enforcement, and that is such a double-edged sword sometimes. And we have a lot of agencies that are still very much trying to navigate that and figuring it out. And we've got old school chiefs and sheriffs that are reluctant to even engage in social media. But I guarantee you that social media is here to stay. It's not going anywhere, and we need to accept it and adapt to it. Aram is on the cutting edge of that effort to connect with his community through social media. And he just frankly posts some really funny content. and it's a cool page to follow, and you can follow him at 911 Strong on Instagram. Of course, in the show notes for this episode, thesquadroom.net, you'll see all the links for both of their social medias and how to reach out to them if you'd like, and links to their podcast as well. So here we are with the very first ever live event for the Squad Room, a live recording at ProForce in Brea, California on September 28th of 2019. All right, everybody, welcome to this episode of the Squad Room. It's a live podcast. Thank you all for being here. Appreciate everyone who's come out. I'll introduce my guests in just a moment, but we're here at ProForce Law Enforcement down in Brea, California, who's been a great sponsor of this show for a long time. And for anyone here, who's in the audience, want to be careful that you. It's easy to go downstairs and spend a whole lot of money because there's some really good prices on firearms, especially. But they have all sorts of gear. We have Sight Action Apparel out front with their cool shirts, and Taran Tactical and a bunch of others. So I want to thank ProForce for being such great supporters of the efforts of our show. I want to introduce my guests. I'll do that. There's a couple firsts here today. First one, obviously, is that I'm doing this in front of a live audience. And that's not the least bit intimidating for a guy who's used to staring at the wall or a Skype video while he records. But here we are. So that's a first. This other first is, I guess this is a second, but I have two guests today live, and also my very first dispatcher on the show. So we'll get to introductions here real quick. First is Sergeant Aram Cho, who is known better on social media anyway as 911 Strong, or at 911 Strong. About 20 years in law enforcement?
Yep, 20 years this month.
Most of that with the municipal department in East LA County, but also some time with LA County Sheriff's Department.
Correct.
Before you lateraled over. A man who's had several different assignments throughout your career, and we'll get to some of those things. One of the most fascinating things I think about my this guest, Aaron, was that you had intense involvement in the delivery of your fourth child. I learned doing my research on this. You delivered your fourth child from the seat of the Lincoln Navigator in a McDonald's parking lot.
Close. It was a Ford Expedition.
Ford Expedition.
Yeah.
Okay.
We're Ford people, but I think the Lincoln might happen one day.
Well, Aaron, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
And of course, off to your left and my left as well is your partner in crime on your new podcast, the 911 Strong podcast. Again, first dispatcher I've had on the show. And
thanks for
Kristen,
having me.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
I've had a hard time finding a dispatcher who wants to talk about the job, actually. So
Yeah, there's not many of us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I love what you're doing on your social media pages and trying to do outreach. And
Thank you.
And basically what I see doing the same thing that I'm trying to attempt to do for younger officers, particularly, you're doing for the dispatchers.
Yeah. I'm trying to get our stories out there.
Yeah, no, it's great.
Yeah.
And so we'll touch on this a little bit more, but I mentioned co-hosts of your own podcast. You both now have a podcast that you host together.
Yes.
So who's the host and who's the co-host?
Well, it's a team.
We'll call Aram the host. Let's be real.
You're being very nice.
Yeah, we thought we'd do this thing because we actually carpool. Her husband, Danny, is a corporal on my patrol team, and we've been friends for a long time. Our families, it's quite a unique thing because not only do we get along well at work, but we get along well off duty. Our families, as you know, maybe in law enforcement, it's hard to find a family dynamic that meshes well.
Yeah.
And when you find that, you kind of latch onto it. So it's not just the husbands that have to get along, the wives have to get along, and the kids have to get along. And it's quite a unique thing. I don't know why, but we found that in law enforcement. You know, you can have the wives and husband get along, but the kids fight. You can have the kids get along, but the husband don't like each other. So we have a really unique thing here. And so we carpool. Danny and Kristen and I carpool into work about an hour each way. And we find ourselves having such great discussions. And we said, this needs to be recorded. And some of the stuff we talk about, we obviously can't put on a podcast. But the other stuff I think is enlightening to some people that aren't intimately involved in our career fields. And it's, it's representative of today's culture and society. And I think, not that I think what we have to say people should listen to, but I think it's interesting enough that people would want to listen to it.
How are you finding who's your audience? Is it people aspiring to be cops, or is it other cops who just want to hear?
Yeah, I think we're drawing from our social media accounts.
Mm-hmm.
So both of us have larger social media accounts, and we've kind of harvested an audience artificially, I guess, for the podcast. We just kind of directed them over. And so on social media, we're able to give them a piece of our lives a minute at a time. And with the podcast, we're able to give them a little bit more. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what's drawing them towards the podcast, is they get to see more of an unfiltered look at what we are, because none of it's scripted.
It's more in depth, I think.
Yeah. And we talk about subjects that expand beyond a minute. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what people like, and that's what's gravitating to them to the podcast.
It's the beauty about podcasts in general, right? You'll be able to go however long you want on whatever topic you want. And there's a podcast for anybody out there. I mean, we were talking before we started recording about how we both got into podcasts through commuting and just kind of listening to podcasts with that forced time in the car.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think if you look at the trends, more people are turning towards podcasts. Standard radio is kind of a dying thing.
Yeah.
And people are wanting to move away from commercialized audio. So people listen to streaming music, and I think people that tune into podcasts are the type of people that want to learn something at the end of the day. So that's what I do. Before I started my podcast, I was an avid podcast listener. And if it was something that would put a new wrinkle in my brain, that was something I was going to subscribe to.
Right. So I want to go back to a couple different things I touched on in the intro there, but you both work for the same agency.
Right? Yes.
And then, Kristen, your husband is his corporal.
Yes.
Right. So describe for people who aren't from Los Angeles, and I won't ask you to name the city you work for, but the size, the type, the demographic, the kind of environment you work in, that kind of stuff.
You want to go with the demographics?
Yeah.
You're probably
so
better.
Yeah, we're in the San Gabriel Valley. Our city and agency is considered the hub of the San Gabriel Valley. Mm-hmm. It was a rocking and rolling place in the 50s, literally. We had American Legion Stadium there that kind of put the city on the map. So Art LeBeau would host his weekly concerts with Richie Valens and the Big Bopper and all the icons of the 50s. So it's a diverse community. There's it's multi-generational. It's the 10th largest out of the 88 cities in LA County.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So population-wise, it's huge, but geographically, we're small. We're about 10.5 square miles. That's our geographic footprint. So you put the 10th largest community in LA County into one of the smallest geographic footprints, so it's very dense. So
what is the population?
It's about 135,000.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and when I first started, I lateraled from the LA County Sheriff's, and when I first started, we had about 165 officers. Mm-hmm. And through budget cuts and attrition, and what a lot of agencies are facing today, having to do a lot more with less, we've whittled down to about 120.
Yeah.
So, and our population is just getting bigger. And so we're doing what a lot of agencies are doing right now, and is getting creative with our enforcement. But you
guys are stretched thin at that number for that population.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I picked up an overtime spot last night.
You worked last night?
I worked last night.
Oh,
yeah. So did she. So
yeah.
So if you fall asleep into your microphone,
we're good. I'm coffeeed up. Luckily, Chick-fil-A was around the corner, and I was able to grab some coffee on the way in. So
all right. Well, appreciate you being here. The overtime thing is that's everywhere now, isn't it?
Yeah, and whether you want to work it or not, a lot of people don't. A lot of people think it's there for the taking per se, and it's not just a grade thing; it's a necessity thing. A lot of agencies, including ours, have a thing called minimum staffing.
Oh yeah,
and
if you don't have minimum staffing,
and sadly,
you probably should.
There are agencies that don't, and it's surprising, but it's not just an officer safety thing; it's a public safety thing. We have to have coverage out there to accommodate the needs of the public, and if we can't provide the officers and the staffing that we need, it really is detrimental to the type of service we should be providing.
Well, 100%. Yeah. So are you from L.A.?
I am. I was actually born in Seoul, Korea. My dad was in the service. He was in the Army, and I was born in an Army base in Seoul. And we did a short stint in Fort Lewis, Washington. Okay. And then when he discharged, our home was Alhambra, California. And that's where I was raised. That's where I lived up until the academy. And once I was making good money as a deputy, I moved out on my own. But I stayed in the San Gabriel Valley for the most part.
So where's a young deputy? Because one of the greatest things about this job that I didn't get to experience was if you're young, like 21, 22 years old, This is one of the best jobs that you can come out of and make serious money as a young person.
Oh, yeah.
And get ahead of a lot of the problems that you have. My first job was in the music industry, and I was making like $20,000 a year in New York City, which is basically like nothing.
Right.
Yeah.
It's so expensive out there.
But I don't know why I'm compelled to ask, but what is a young single guy? Where do you choose to move to when you finally have that money coming out of Alhambra?
That's rough. I think for us, I was in Pasadena a lot.
Okay.
Old Town Pasadena was where all the young single guys went to find young single women, and so I lived in a community really close. I was probably 5 minutes away from Old Town Pasadena.
Okay.
And I lived there for, I think, about 2 or 3 years. And
when would this have been? What years?
2000 to 2003.
Okay.
And then the only reason why I moved out was because I met my wife, and
good reason.
We got married, and having a roommate around was probably not a good idea for a new married couple.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And your mom or dad, are they still in LA?
No, they both passed away.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And so my mom, they were divorced when I was 18. So my dad stayed up here in Alhambra, but my mom moved to where her family was in San Diego.
Okay.
So she actually traveled a lot. After the divorce, her first place was Lakeland, Florida. She aspired to be a pro golfer. She was a talented golfer. And back then, you had to actually go to PGA school. And it was something that, it was a very difficult thing. It's like passing the bar. So you don't necessarily just need to be a talented golfer. You have to actually hit the books pretty hard. And so that eluded her. So she opened up a driving range in Greenville, South Carolina. So she did that until a hurricane came and wiped that down. And then she started all over and did some small businesses in San Diego and did pretty well for herself.
You mentioned something, she was a florist at some point?
Yeah.
That was one of her jobs?
So she wanted to be a florist in Korea, but when my dad was reassigned back to the States, she came and she thought, I'm just going to apply at the first place I could think of, and she applied at a place called the Venice La Brea Florist. And this place was really well known in the 20s, since the 20s. They even had signature wrapping paper for their stuff. So if you bought flowers in LA, you wanted to buy it from Venice La Brea Florist. So she came with actually no references. The boss wasn't even hiring, but said, hey, why don't you make a design and we'll consider you for Christmas or Mother's Day. And she made something that they'd never seen before. And that was in the 80s and 90s was known as the Oriental design flowers. So because it caught this guy's eye, he hired her on the spot, and she started making these Oriental design flowers, and people flocked from everywhere because it was the only place you can get them. Mm-hmm. And then she was invited to trade shows across the country, teach other people how to do these Oriental designs. And she saved up enough money eventually to open up her own shop in Long Beach. And after a couple years, she found out the owner of Venice La Brea was retiring. She called and asked if it was for sale. And it came full circle. She ended up buying the place that gave her first chance at being a florist. And so she did that for a few years, up until I was about, probably 17 or so. Oh, actually 18. I graduated from high school and she still had it. But the flower business is extremely difficult. You're living there on Mother's Day, Valentine's Day, all the major holidays where you buy flowers, you're living there. So it's kind of neat growing up in a flower shop, I guess. It's not something you picture cops doing, I guess. But that was my unique background.
That was, you were telling me a story earlier about how that shop even survived the LA riots.
Yeah, so Venice La Brea is actually in South Central. And it's right down the hill from an area called Baldwin Hills, which is an affluent African-American community. And so when the riots happened, we were glued to the TV, and we noticed it was getting really close to where my mom's shop was. So my dad and mom drove out there. I stayed at home with my grandparents, and it was next door to a liquor store that was also Korean-owned. But the owner of the shop was adopted by black parents when he was a baby. And so he was a member of the African-American community. Mm-hmm. But I don't think people in the community realized who he was because he identified as African-American, even though if you're just looking at him, he looked like a Korean man. Mm-hmm. But they burned his place down during the riots simply because it was Korean-owned. And one of my mom's delivery drivers, his name is Martin, I think in his mind, he realized if the place burned down, he'd be out of a job. So he actually spray painted on the windows black owned and stood in front of the shops and prevented it from being looted and burnt down. And that was the only reason I think that the place remained.
Do you remember much from that time growing up and the tension that was going on?
I was about 11 or 12, and I had, race wasn't even a thing. I don't think you're really conscious about race until maybe your later years, maybe high school or so. But I was 11, and you don't really see color, I guess, and you're not aware of things. People aren't really racial towards you, and so I became aware of a lot of that stuff afterwards, because there was a lot of tension between the African American community and the Korean community.
Yeah, I remember that
in LA. So yeah, and I was going to church in LA at the time, and it was a Korean Presbyterian church, and I remember the pastors talking about safety back in the parking lots and having to hire security because the Korean churches are being targeted, and it was just a weird time. But you don't think about things like that as an 11-year-old. The world is a little different. But looking back at it, yeah, I've seen how much we've changed and moved along. But in the 80s, we were just 20 years removed from a lot of segregation still.
Right. So mom was an entrepreneur, a florist, a golfer. Dad was in the service. What did he stay in the service when he came back to the States?
I think he did a total of 8 years. When he enlisted, it was towards the end of the Vietnam era, so he was considered a vet. But he never deployed to Vietnam. And when he came out, he was also an entrepreneur. One of the first businesses he had was a PIP printing franchise.
Oh, yeah.
So he did copy and print, and then the home video thing became a phenomenon. People were renting movies, so he opened up a video shop in El Monte, California, which is in San Gabriel Valley. And I remember working there, after school and in the summers for about 11 years.
Mm-hmm.
But what killed that business was a Blockbuster Video opened up right across the street. So the little mom and pop video shop became no more. And then he did a couple other things before he fell into a groove. He found a knack doing HVAC. So he did refrigeration cases and heating and air conditioning for businesses in Koreatown. Mm-hmm. And so he did that up until he retired.
So both hard workers, but other than Dad's service, do you come from law enforcement family? Do you have cousins or grandparents or anybody like that?
My dad and both his brothers were Army, and my grandfather was Army. And the only law enforcement tie is one of my uncles was an MP, and my grandfather was career Army. He was a CID investigator. So it's law enforcement investigative branch of the Army. Mm-hmm. So that's what he did. But now I was the first municipal police officer in that family.
What drew you? I always like to ask. I'm always curious what brings people into service.
It was kind of by accident. I always knew I was going to join the military. It was after high school I was going to enlist, but my uncles, my dad, my grandfather, they're all enlisted, and they pleaded with me to go to college. Because they said, if you're going to join the military, do the military thing.
Go be an officer.
Go be an officer, right. So, I did. I went to college, and I was walking from a classroom to the Chick-fil-A at the Student Union.
I'm seeing a theme here in your life.
Yeah, I love Chick-fil-A. And I was stopped by a sheriff's recruiter, and that's how it happened. He says, "What are your plans after college?" And I said, "I'm going to join the Army." And he said, "Well, what if I told you can serve your community and get paid for it handsomely?" I said, "Well, what are we talking about?" I think starting pay back then was like $35,000. I don't know, 35, 40,000, and to me that was a lot of money. I mean, back then I was paying for college working 2 part-time jobs. Yeah. So, and that's how cheap college was. And boy, times have changed. Fast forward 20 years later, I couldn't even afford college off of like 4 part-time jobs. So, I think I saw the money. I'm like, yeah, this is what I want to do. I talked to my parents about it, and they said, go for it. I think in their heart of hearts, they didn't want me to join the military. Mm-hmm. I think they wanted me to settle down and build roots at home instead of, traveling the country and maybe setting up roots somewhere else.
No less stressful for them, though.
Probably. I mean, we weren't. It was right before Desert Storm and all that stuff. So, when did that hit? Actually, no, it might have been right after. Was it 2004? Yeah. So it was right before all that stuff. I was in college in '95, so I think we were in some sort of desert conflict. But I don't know, for whatever reason, God led me to becoming a police officer at that very moment. And I'd like to. I hear all these people talk about how difficult it was for them, their journey, but
It wasn't.
It wasn't for me. I literally dropped my application off, and they said, "Okay, you show up to this day. You're going to do a physical agility test, and right afterwards, if you pass, you're going to do an interview, and after that, what else was there? A written. All right, so yeah, not in that order. I don't. It's been 20 years, but it was all in one day.
Down at the Star Center.
Yeah, and they farmed you in there. I remember there being like 300 or 400 people.
Yeah,
there.
I did that too there.
And I just like I didn't expect to get to each phase, and before you know it, I did, and I went through a background process, and it just kind of happened. So, and it's not a job in the sense that it's something I expected to quit in a few years. I knew this. I was very conscious of the fact that this was going to be a career. It just kind of took me aback that it happened so quickly. I was ready to do it, but looking back at being a 22-year-old kid, I was literally a kid, and they handed me a gun and gave me arrest powers, and but I'm glad I had that experience with the sheriff's department because all of it was done in custody, and I think that custody environment matured me, and I did a lot of growing up in that environment.
I think it does for a lot of people. My agency, we have 2 different classifications, so I go straight to the street. I'm
nice.
County sheriffs as well, but I go straight to the street as sworn, and we have a different classification that goes to the jail and only works the jail. So if you promote up in the jail, you stay in the jail. Same for the street. But I found that when someone is struggling on field training or early on probation, if they go to the jail for a year or 2 or a little bit more and get some of that knowledge and some maturity out of it, they come back seasoning. They come back and they're almost always successful when they do.
Yeah, unfortunately, I never hit the streets with the sheriff's department. I lateraled over, and Kristen was already a dispatcher there. I think her dad was the assistant chief at the time. And for whatever reason, Kristen's dad really liked me a lot, and he eventually became my chief and promoted me to corporal. So when I came to El Monte, it was an immediate feeling of home. Because coming from an agency with 7,000 employees, it's hard to say it's a family because it's impossible to know everybody. But going to an agency that had like 165 at the time, you did know everybody, and everybody was so welcoming. We were just the first batch of laterals that came over because they like to hire traditionally homegrown people, people that were explorers, cadets, that worked their way up, and they'd send them to the academy. So I came over with like 12 different deputies and a mixture of deputies and LAPD officers. Including James, who's waving back there. But we were, welcomed. Yeah. But at the same time, they told us we would never promote. That we would, we'll welcome you with open arms, but just know that you'll be working patrol the rest of your life because we promote homegrown boys. But I've got to say that things changed for the better in my case, and I've had a really charmed career.
What are the sorts of things that you've done?
So one of the first things I did was the community relations office. We were having a rise in our Asian population, a growing Asian community, and I think they wanted to put someone in the office that was representative of the community. So they put me in there. I did that for a few years, and our community relations office was quite different. Most community relations offices have 1 or 2 officers, and they're usually people recovering from injuries. They're reluctant to go, but we were designed as a problem-oriented policing office. So there was actually 12 detectives back there.
Oh, wow.
And you're given the rank of detective. You're in plain clothes. You're handling everything from gang activity to narcotics.
That's a fun gig.
Yeah, it was really fun. And, and you're slowly immersed because you're not working traditional investigations, so you're slowly immersed into the process. So it's not like I was, I had to be this 27-year-old trying to figure out how to be a detective. You're slowly groomed in the process. And the thing I got out of it the most, though, is you develop relationships with people in the community. And these are the same people I was going to work with throughout the rest of my career. And those stakeholders were just as important back then to me as they are today.
Yeah.
So I think having that experience was awesome. And from there, I came out and became a field training officer, and then a corporal. And then I went to the traditional desk. I worked DB for a couple of years. And then I had a desire to come back out to patrol. I felt like I had a lot of patrol left in me. And I think I did another year or 2 before I promoted to sergeant. And I've been a patrol sergeant ever since.
What's been your favorite position?
I think it's going to be a tie between sergeant and field training officer.
Yeah.
And if you think about it, they're kind of the same job.
For sure.
Just a different scope of
instead of 1 trainee, you got 5.
Exactly,
6
yeah.
Or 10 or whatever.
And since I'm, let's see, in January it'll be 3 years that I've been a sergeant. But with a smaller agency, promotions happen a lot less frequently, so I'm still at the bottom of the barrel as far as sergeants are concerned. So I'm stuck on the weekend side, but I like that because I get new officers on my team, and they're young people that I can mentor and mold the way I see. If I could have mentored people as an FTO, this is how I would do it, just on a broader scale. I got to say, it's also fun not having to be stuck in a beat and write paper, but having your own team is really cool.
It is. My most fun assignment has been and probably always will be patrol sergeant.
Yeah.
Right, running a team for all those same reasons, and being able to, and I'm the same way. I love having new guys come in, and young women too, who want to learn or they want to go out and do stuff. I'll take a good attitude and a desire to go do something over the skill set that's already in place. Like a 20 event, I'll take that almost any day of the week.
You're getting them pre-seasoned before they get salty,
right? But you have the ability to have a direct impact on their career, but also they're going to be your partner for the next 30 years. I want that. I want to say in how they act or how they interact with,
I think it's a common theme too. Almost everybody I've spoken to that's gone through the ranks said sergeant was the best position. And it's also incidentally the hardest position to attain. So I think you have to relish those moments as a sergeant because it took you so long to get there. I think that's what a lot of people have in common.
How do you, if you had to do your own employee evaluation right now as a sergeant, how would you rate yourself?
Me?
Yeah.
Oh boy. Am I being funny or am I being honest?
Either.
I still have room.
I asked this because one of the biggest challenges as a sergeant, there's a couple. One is I found it could be a very lonely position, right? I don't know how many sergeants you staff on any given night, but for me, I might have 5 or 6 other sergeants out, but they're 20, 30 miles away. So it's really just you, right, for your geographic area. Yeah. But there may be internal stuff going on too, where you may not want to share certain things with a certain sergeant or anything else. And especially if you're the senior sergeant, it all comes to you anyway.
Sure.
And so self-awareness is such a big part of being a good leader that I don't think I was when I started as a sergeant, but now trying to constantly evaluate where I'm at and what my skill set is and what I need to improve. So that's why I ask.
Yeah, I receive critique well, and on our department we have a lieutenant, a watch commander that covers all the shifts. And if I make a mistake and I don't catch it, I'll hear about it, which is great because I'm still developing. 3 years sounds like a long time, but
it's not. Right?
It's I'm in my infancy as far as supervision, and there's a tremendous amount of responsibility that you feel because you're the man, you're the guy making decisions, and your whole team's kind of responsible for you. And your scope of supervision not only extends to your patrol division, it extends to records and dispatch, and you kind of have to coordinate all these things, and it's easy to forget one component. And I get this from Kristen a lot, is after a critical incident, I do a really horrible job debriefing dispatch. And they're pretty much in it from beginning to end. Yeah. And it's shame on me for not involving them in the debrief. But that's just stuff that I'm conscious about as I go along, and I try to do a better job passing on the information. But I would say I don't know, I'm probably average on a scale of 1 to 5. I would give myself 2.5 maybe, because I still have a lot more to grow, and I don't want to say I know everything because I definitely don't.
I say the simple fact that you're being, I think you're being hypercritical, but the fact that you're aware and you're considering these things probably bumps that score right there.
Okay, I'll let you say that. But I overlap. We overlap. We have a swing shift that overlaps. So at any given time, we'll have a couple sergeants out there.
Yeah.
But what's kind of cool about the weekend side is that we've all kind of come up together. So the sergeant I overlap with currently, we were in the community relations department together. So it's a good time when we show up together.
Yeah, we similar boat. We had no promotions for a long time, especially after the recession and everything hit, right? And then we had a group of us all promoted at once, and then there was another wave just after us, and it wasn't long. It was probably about 3 years to the point where I realized out of the 6 sergeants on duty over the entire county that night, the 6 sergeants, I'm the senior sergeant.
Oh, wow.
I'm like, uh-oh. Yeah. And we got rid of watch commanders or lieutenants' positions on patrol during the recession. So the shift commander is now the senior sergeant.
Oh, wow.
So that makes for some interesting times.
Yeah. That gets you, you're banded right now for lieutenant, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Congratulations on it.
We'll see. It's hard to think forward from that because, or to like give up the idea of the sergeant job because I would love it so much.
Right.
To move into a rank that, has different challenges, and then you're more and more removed from being able to pull up car to car, the parking lot of the bonds and just chat with your guys.
Yeah, it's hard to finally pull the plug and say that you're done with patrol, but that's essentially what happens when you become a watch commander. You're relegated to a desk, and then that's going to be the rest of your career.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I transitioned out of patrol about a year ago and got put on a desk job, and going through that withdrawal.
Yeah.
of not being able to get up and around the door when all the cars are running out of the raw code. So we've been talking a lot, but Kristen, the opposite of him. With being the first generation in law enforcement, sounds like you come from a pretty deep law enforcement family.
Yeah, a lot of my relatives were officers. So my grandfather on my mom's side, he was an officer with Monterey Park for a while. And then his son and my dad were best friends. And so they went to the academy together, and they both ended up working at the same department. My brother worked there also for a short amount of time. My dad's brother is a jailer there. And then, I've been there. So I started, though, when I was 19. Well, just shy. I got hired when I was 18 and then just turned 19. And my dad just said, well, you want to stop working as a bagger at a grocery store and you want to make some more money? I'm like, sure, what do I have to do? And he's like, answer phones. I'm like, okay, got it. So
little did you know.
Little did I know. But I made it through and got hired, which later on I found out he just gave me the resume as like a form of practice. He didn't think I'd actually pass and like get it. Such a loving father. So, but I earned my own, and he didn't get involved in the hiring process or anything throughout the years that me and him were working together. He would step out of the room if anything was to come up about me or anything like that. And I appreciated it because my pride takes over and I don't want help from daddy. So, so I started, when I was pretty young. So I'll be there 20 years also this month.
Wow.
Or October. Yeah. So all law enforcement.
The dispatcher, that is such a, you just touched on it too, a debriefing and all that. But, we're just in my county coming off a mass casualty incident with the Conception dive boat. And unfortunately have been involved in several other mass casualty incidences in my county. And the one thing we've learned out of that is that we have to make sure that we're checking in with dispatch too.
Yeah.
And that they're part of the, not only the debrief from the tactical side and what went right, but I don't know if you guys do it, but the stress debrief.
We don't do any of it.
You guys don't have that?
No.
It's something I would highly recommend pushing out to your department. And it's awkward. I mean, I just went through one 2 weeks ago after the dive boat burned, right? And it's awkward and uncomfortable and nobody wants to be there, but at the same time, people need to be there, I think, for those kinds of things, so they at least know that
it fills in the gaps.
To listen. Yeah, it fills in the gaps. That's a great way to describe it.
Yeah. We're trying to push through that. We went to me and another dispatcher and 2 officers went to a critical stress incident management training class. So we're trying to get it started slowly but surely, but then, money troubles hit. So it's been put on the back burner. But I haven't been included in any debriefings at all since I've been there. So it's just something, we're first to get called upon, but we're very last to be checked in on, if at all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So obviously one of the themes of the show is trying to take care of yourself and your own mental health and your wellness and well-being. What are the things that you do then if you're kind of left to your own devices? What are the things that you've used that have helped you succeed in that? Fortunately
for us, I'm allowed to go use our department gym. So for me, I had hit like a breaking point, about 10 years ago. And I started using the gym as a form of just de-stressing. So that's what I would do. And then now, in addition to that, I do a lot of breath work at the desk because sometimes we're not able to get up and leave. So just taking like 4 deep breaths in and holding it and then releasing it really slow just to get your heart rate down and the tension down from your shoulders and neck, because that's where all of us, for the most part, dispatchers carry it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
where did you learn that? Or do you follow anyone in particular? Because there's a couple different people who do breath work that I
go to, like, Aaron's going to make fun of me. I go to women's masterminds class, And I go to different conferences around different states.
It just sounds so diabolical. That's why I make fun of it. Women masterminds.
We're just women with a purpose, and we build a community of support, basically.
Fantastic.
And so one of the girls there that was a speaker, it's Jen Esquire, and online or in Instagram, it's Doc Jen Fit. And so she does physical therapy, but she's a little bit more forward thinking. So wherever there's pain, she knows that there's somewhere else above that or below that that's causing that pain to go down there. So I had had some troubles just with energy and with my feelings. And she was telling me just to do certain stretches and breath work because I'm always in like an escalated flight or fight response, and I don't get that much rest. So my body's just always constantly tired from that. So with the stretching and with the breathing, it really started helping in that area.
Yeah, that breathing I think is crucial. I've there's different kinds of it, of course, but I think what you're describing is basically what I know to be like box breathing.
Yeah.
You know, you inhale for a count of 4, hold it for 4, release it at a count of 4.
Yeah, and doing it from your gut and not from your chest.
That's the key, right? And I've realized that over the last year, and I think it has to do somewhat with sitting and being at a desk job now, but I've become like a chest breather. And it's all like short and shallow, and then all this tension gets built up versus trying to breathe from the belly. It sounds absurd to somebody.
It does. It's very woo-woo, but it works really well.
It is very woo-woo, but it does work, and I've used it even on my way to hot calls when everything's getting spun up and people are starting to engage on the radio and it's starting to look like it's going to be something that goes south, just using that breathing.
Yeah. Engage
that parasympathetic nervous system and just, like you say, slow your heart rate, slow your cortisol release, all those things.
Yeah.
And is there something you do either on duty or off duty?
Definitely not deep gut breathing because it can get dangerous for me, especially with all the broccoli I eat. You don't want to be around for that. But no, you know what's funny is when you guys were discussing that, it's something that we instinctively do anyway during a stressful situation. Not even being conscious about it, you kind of take a deep breath, right? And maybe it's something that we practiced in the academy because that's what we do for controlled shooting and stuff. But I find myself doing that right before I get out of the car and I know I'm going to go into a stressful situation, maybe dealing with an angry customer or something. I'll take a deep breath before I come out. But no, I kind of let things go. I don't hold things. I've had a lot of tragedy occur in my life, so a lot of things that people would view as stressful situations kind of just are situations that I have to deal with, but it's not...
your past has informed your perspective on those things.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I'm pretty lighthearted anyway. Maybe it's from being an only child and having to make light of things to make friends growing up or whatnot, or always wanting to be in the center of attention. But I always clown around. As a matter of fact, in the academy, I didn't win any awards like top shot or honor recruit or anything. The award they gave me was class clown. And
shocker.
Yeah, and it's something that was not a category.
Probably not I was saying.
But for my particular class 306, they made an award for class clown, and that's just who I am as a person. I make light of situations. And sometimes it gets me in trouble, but for the most part, I think I've honed in on that art to make it acceptable and not offensive.
But laughter is one of the best.
The
saying, right?
Definitely.
Laughter is the best medicine.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
It's a universal thing. I don't care what country you're in. In some countries, a belch is a form of approval for a meal, where it's considered rude here in America. But in any place you go in the world, if you laugh, it's universally accepted.
Yeah.
So I think it crosses countries, and that's why on social media, I think for the most part, everything is centered around, at least for what I do, everything's centered around humor.
Yeah, for sure. One of the things, you've got 4 kids, and Kristen, you have 3?
3 girls, yeah.
3 girls. So busy households, busier than mine. I have 2, and that's already chaos. How has having the kids, has that changed your ability to de-stress? And I don't mean that like the kids are stressful. I know they are. But I mean, like, you can't sometimes do the things you used to do when you were 21 and single, 22 and single to de-stress. You have to find different methods. I also realize that with my kids, I have a direct input for how I'm handling my stress. When they look back at me and think, Dad's being a jerk.
Yeah.
And I go, oh yeah, Dad is being a jerk. Has that played a role at all in your development?
I think as I've gotten older, I leave work at home. I mean, I leave work at work. I don't bring it home. So
you have a husband who's a cop too, so
but
that's not an easy thing to do.
No, I think it's just we communicate a lot while we're at work, and we're just fortunate, like you said, that we're a smaller agency. So if I have a question about a call or anything, I get closure from the guys in the field. I feel comfortable with all of them to reach out if I need to, like, hey, what was up with this or whatever. So I get the closure there. If I'm frustrated about a day at work, I can call my husband and he'll understand what my frustrations are. Or when we're in our carpool, we can talk about whatever. And then as soon as we get out of the car, it's out. And then when I'm home, I'm the wife and I'm the mom. And yeah, my kids are stressed. They stress me out a lot. But I try not to let what happens at work affect my kids. And I don't want them to to see that part of it, Like, they know what we do. We don't really keep them too much in a bubble. But, yeah, I don't think they've ever really said, like, I'll tell them if I had a bad day or something and just, like, let's stop screaming in the house. I've had a bad day of people screaming at me all day. And then they're like, okay. And then they go about their business and they're fine. So, but yeah, not too much. I don't think they've really, and my husband either. He really doesn't bring it home. He's very lighthearted like Aram. He's just always smiling and go lucky and lets everything roll off his back. So they never really see us too stressed out.
Aaron, have you ever had any moments with your kids, some of them are in the audience right here, where the gravity of the job hit them, or you realize that they're impacted by that and feeling that?
I don't know. My commute's an hour and a half, so I have a lot of time to decompress, and I actually do take a deep breath before I walk in. But I don't know. I think I do a pretty good job if I know I'm going to be at an elevated stress level, avoiding a situation. And I don't know, when I do finally come down to it, that's when I'll insert myself back into the family. But that's the only time I think where I kind of seclude myself, because I know I'm kind of a powder keg ready to explode.
Touchy at the moment, yeah. I asked too because I remember both of my kids, but my wife is the daughter of a cop. And then our two kids, but I remember both of my kids separately at about the same age, which was probably about 5, coming to me and seeing me on duty, and then kind of, they're seeing me in uniform. And that process of registering in their brain, like, why does Dad have to wear a bulletproof vest? And that question coming up, and then having to be honest about it.
Yeah.
Or, recently, again, going back to the dive boat that we just experienced, the Conception dive boat disaster. And my son, who's now 8, was watching me. I was incident commander on the scene for the recovery of that, right? So I was very, very, very involved. And ran home one night to repack a bag, to turn around and basically get ready to launch again the next morning. And would come home for dinner, changing, putting some clothes into a backpack. And I saw my son off to the side. He was kind of quietly watching me. And we didn't think that he knew anything about what was going on, just that Dad's away at work and he's going to be gone for a couple days. So really had no idea that he was processing all this, really. And out of nowhere, just kind of quietly said, "Good luck tonight, Daddy. I hope your boat doesn't burn like the other one." And so it was like, that was a heart-wrenching moment. Yeah. Where time stopped, and I realized he was as impacted by this as I was, or more even. And that this thought is going through his little 8-year-old head. Yeah. And then I had to spend the next half hour answering questions on fire safety on boats and trying to reassure him that my boat wasn't going to be like that, and that I wouldn't be in that situation. And so I worry, to me, just as a parent, I'm sure both parents too, like, I constantly worry about what they're being presented with, or in that terms. I don't. Am I neurotic?
Well, no. I think you're right, but I mean, maybe our kids would probably respond the same way. Like, I grew up. My dad was an officer in the same city I grew up in, so I very frequently would see him in uniform driving around, and he would stop by the house for lunch or dinner or holidays when he was working. Yeah. So I think how your children are present in what's going on with you, that's how I was with my dad. But like, for us, our kids don't see my husband or Aram as frequently in uniform because we don't live in the cities that we work in. Yeah. So that might not be a constant thing in their head, and or we don't watch the news at our house either. So they're not always seeing everything that's going on. Yeah. So that might be another factor too.
Yeah, that's a good one. I think the disconnect of the distance, or the geographic distance, is a good one. We don't watch the news either. We don't even have cable. I don't know.
We don't have cable anymore.
My son learned of this whole thing, other than school.
We all had YouTube. Yeah, YouTube.
Yeah, that's true. It's just it was such a shock that he was so aware of that.
They're probably discussing it in school.
Or too. School. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, obviously for us it was big news.
Yeah.
So I want to transition because so I've been following you, Aaron, for a year or so, and in that time, you've really grown into quite a social media presence. And I'm curious because from the agency perspective, at least, social media can be a double-edged sword.
Sure.
And when an officer decides to go out and kind of put their footprint out in social media, it has to be navigated very carefully, I imagine. I am on Instagram and Twitter and all those, but I don't put a lot of effort into it, admittedly, and have actually learned from you a lot. But what was that process like, and what was the decision to go out there and do that?
The decision, well, I've always had the accounts. It was never intended on being an influencer account or a public account. But it became, I had some tragedy happen a few years back, and it became a healthy outlet for me. I found that if I was putting stuff out there that made other people laugh, it made me laugh. And it just evolved from there. It became what was meaningful to me in one way became meaningful to people in other ways. I had officers reach out to me from agencies across the country telling me, thank you for humanizing the badge, showing people that we're not robots, that we have senses of humor. And that just opened up opportunities. As I grew, I had nonprofits and organizations that dealt with humanizing the badge, reach out to me and involve me in their efforts. And it put me in touch with other people that had larger accounts, and we collaborated and did videos, and we would travel the country and speak at different police departments and show agencies how to extend community relations beyond the physical presence, but through social media, because that's where we are in today's day and age. Our public is very much on social media as they are in the street, and a lot of times they'd rather communicate to an officer via social media than in the streets. They're whether they're intimidated by us or just too busy to show up to a station, having access to an officer through direct message or comments is kind of a luxury, especially if you're an officer willing to do that. And I'm glad when I was doing it, there was only a handful of us 4 years ago.
Yeah.
And now there's so many people doing it, and they're doing a really good job at it.
Yeah.
That you're finding this extension of community relations present now, and it's a very useful tool. I think you're in public informations as well, and my major in college was communications and public relations, and that eventually evolved to an adjunct teaching position. So I'm an adjunct professor at California Baptist University, and I teach public relations, and I teach social media strategies. So I'm
gonna have to take your class.
Yeah, well, getting it from the civilian side is gives you a different level of perspective,
right?
Because as cops, we do such a good job of focusing on things that relate to our profession, but sometimes you have to step outside and get the perspectives of civilians, and sometimes teaching that subject matter to civilians gives you a broader perspective. So, yeah, it's an outside way of thinking, and I get a lot of flack from guys at work.
You do?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, a lot actually. People think I do this, that it's self-serving. And even though there's a lot of benefit to it, and I get to be on your show here at ProForce, a place where I was a customer for a long time, and now I'm doing a show here in one of their rooms, and it's come full circle. But yeah, are there benefits to it? Absolutely. If you're good at it, there are benefits that come along the way. But the original intention, and the intention and still is today, is to humanize the badge, is to reach out to people. And there's a lot of charity that comes from it. I mentioned we travel the country, but we raise money for families of fallen officers through the Cannonball Memorial Run. We do a nonstop drive across the country. I think our last run, we did it in 3.5 days. We don't check in any hotels.
No stopping.
Nope. We stay in the car, a Suburban full of officers, and
imagine what that smells like.
Yeah, we shower with baby wipes.
Dude wipes.
A lot of vests.
Well, when we got into Fort Worth, the chief of police over there says, you guys need to use our facilities ASAP. Because we're in the same clothes for 3-4 days. And so it's funny, we're showering but putting the same stinky clothes right back on, but we felt a little cleaner. But I feel like we make an impact through social media, and I think that's why my department's as forgiving as they are. I've heard stories where agencies have told officers they can't be on social media.
Yeah.
And I'm fortunate enough that I belong to an agency where the chief supports what we do. And a couple times they've had to pull my reins back a little bit, but that's the trial and error. And and figuring out how to do this thing. We're pioneers in this era of cops who are censored, trying to do something on social media where it'd be easier if you weren't censored.
Sure.
But we're writing the book as we speak, and I think by the time I'm done with all this, I think I'll be able to coach people through if they need it. But yeah, we're figuring it out as we go.
Do you have some kind of agreed upon rules with your chief? Like, I imagine, like, we have a social media policy that's actually in policy, but like, posting uniform photos or badges or stuff like that identifies the department. That's frowned upon.
I think that's pretty universal.
I know, like Mike the cop or Officer Daniels, they use fake badges and fake uniforms.
And for the skits, that's what we do as well. Basically, the nuts and bolts of it is trying to disassociate yourself from the agency, because it's a safety thing too.
For sure, yeah.
You don't want people who maybe disagree with you showing up to your office, and it could pose a threat. And our information's out there, so it's one of those things where it's better for people not to know what agency you work for.
Yeah. You touched on it too, that officer safety thing. Cops or anyone in law enforcement is typically very secretive or private, I guess maybe a better word, but even Facebook accounts. Facebook is probably still the most popular social media thing with cops, it seems. Instagram certainly for the younger generation, but there's a natural tendency to shy away from those things in the first place and not put yourself out there or make those things public. You said you've gotten some flack at work, but what are some of the good things that have come from it, from either the people that you mentioned, like talking and traveling and all that, but on a personal level, have you ever had someone come up to you and recognize you from social media and just thank you or have a story like that?
It happens at Disneyland a lot.
At Disneyland?
I don't know why, but Vegas and Disneyland seem to be the two common places where every time we go, we get stopped. And it's cool. I like it. I wouldn't ever consider myself to be, I don't know, I hate to use the word celebrity, but that applies to this one. But it starts conversations. People, I'll be in line for a ride. People come up and say, "Hey, 911 Strong, I love what you do. Can we take a picture?" And the next thing you know, the people that I'm standing in line with are like, "Hey, who are you?" I say, "Oh, I do this thing on social media." And it opens up dialogue. And at the end of the day, that's kind of what this is about. If it's people that support you, it creates a positive dialogue. And even if it's people that don't support you, it opens up the opportunity to tell you, hey, we're not all bad people. And by the way, the people that you view as bad, that equates to less than half of 1% of the entire law enforcement profession across the country. Yeah. And then, there's millions of you, and you give them some statistics to back that. I'm like, actually, there's less than 1 million of us. There's only 900,000 cops to police an entire country of 339,000 or a million people. And so we're, in terms of the scope of authority, the reach, we're a huge minority having to police an entire nation. So, I think the fact that we're able to open up a friendly dialogue in an outside in a neutral environment kind of helps the cause too. And I am welcome to those instances that it happens.
And other than your co-host off to your left here, of course, who were some of your favorite collaborators you've done stuff with? You were shooting videos just like a week or two ago with somebody, or at least you posted it, made it look like it was just 2 weeks ago.
Oh no, we were shooting. So the shooting community is kind of cool. I wouldn't.
I meant shooting videos.
I wasn't shooting. Boy, this whole month's been a blur.
Who are some of the people you've done stuff with?
Early on, I had an opportunity to go to a social media agency in LA called Collab. And they represented a lot of the early Vine stars, like Vincent Marcus and Logan Paul and Ross Smith, who's well known for shooting videos with Granny, Marlon Webb, and these are all guys.
I feel so old right now.
Well, yeah, they make me feel that.
You would probably. I'm really bad with names too. You probably know who they are if you saw their videos.
I recognize Logan Paul.
Yeah, but being in a building where they're there, where they're agents, I'm like, boy, am I a fish out of water. But that's kind of where I got my start. I started.
Collaborations.
Collaborate. And that if you're interested in growing social media wise, one of the best ways to do it is absolutely through collaborations. Because if it's a bigger account that you're collaborating with, especially, you're benefiting from it because they're sharing you, and a lot of their followers end up coming to you. So I got fortunate in that aspect. You mentioned Officer Daniels. He was the one that kind of gave me my big break on social media. I to this day, I don't know why this video became popular, but I was in my backyard flipping burgers in the rain for my family, and I put some patriotic music in the background saying, my family wanted burgers, and am I going to go to McDonald's or Burger King? No, I'm going to do it the American way in the rain. And it just gravitated. Officer Daniels came across it somehow, and he shared it to his millions of followers, and then I gained some traction that way. And the next thing you know, he invited me out to do a collab in LA at the collab studios, and he hooked me up with a lot of other influencers, and just little by little, I think I'm growing pretty slow in the grand scheme of things. On Instagram, I'm at like 52,000. On Facebook, I'm like at 170,000. But there are people that have done it in less time than I have that are at millions of followers. And I always tell Kristen and people that are intimate in what I do in social media that if I'm able to do what I really, really want to do and not be censored, I think I can grow faster, because the shock value accounts for a lot of the reason why people want to follow you. Yeah. But I'm pretty conservative in terms of what I put out there.
Yeah. But think about that, though. 170,000 people. I mean, that's like filling the Rose Bowl twice over. Twice over.
I'm not minimizing what I have at all, and I'm grateful for it. And what's cool is it's small, it's large, which is cool, but it's small enough that I actually have communicated with almost everybody. People that send me messages, I try to get back to everybody. It's very rare that I don't, and it's because maybe they weirded me out or something, because I get some weird requests.
What's the weirdest one you've gotten?
Jeez, I don't even know if I can share it here because my kids are in here. But
it's probably sufficient.
I'm sure you can use your imagination.
But, you can imagine it probably happened. And before I really did lock down concealed where I worked, I had some stuff sent to the station that was questionable too. So there's some
people are weird
weirdos out there, but
especially on social media.
Yeah.
So, Kristen, you're doing a similar thing.
Yeah, but I'm a guppy in a big pond.
A guppy in a big pond. But you're in the pond.
Yeah.
And to me, it seems like you're really trying to help guide the other dispatchers in how to manage those things. And after 20 years, you've certainly got some tips and you know how to do it.
Yeah.
What brought you to moving into social media?
So social media for me had nothing to do with anything I'm doing with now. I first initially started it solely because I started doing fitness competitions and I got sponsored. So I would get money if I won, and then they would give me big discounts on the supplements I would take. And so they said, well, we're only going to do that if you have social media and it has to be public. So I'm like, oh, okay, fine. So I did that initially, and then as it continued to grow and I left the competition field, I started wanting to do more things about dispatchers, because if you look online, there's very few of us that show our face. There's my friend Ryan, and then very few that are public that show it. The rest of them are all memes, because we have that dark sense of humor. And if I were to share something like that, I'd be written up in a heartbeat. I can't share some of that stuff. So I just wanted to give a different look at it, because not a lot of people know about dispatchers or even give a thought about dispatchers, and I just thought that we deserve to be recognized. We aren't the ones obviously out there on the battlefield with you guys, but we are inside of the center, and we are the heart of the center, and we get everything that comes in first, and we don't always thought of as it ends, when you have some type of catastrophe, you're obviously your levels of anxiety and stress are completely different than what ours are. But then once that scenario is done, you guys kind of get to de-escalate and go into the report writing part of it and step away from everything. With us, it could be something that you guys just went through, like a huge shooting or something. And then as soon as that call is over and you guys are there, we hang up the phone. We're still going through whatever you're going through on the radio, and we're answering other phones as it goes, and we don't get a break.
Yeah.
So I just thought that I would start putting my stories out there. And for the most part, that's the stories that gets the most response from all of my followers. Everybody, for the most part, really responds to that and asks a lot of questions. And I get contacted a lot by senior dispatchers and a lot of newer dispatchers that are going into it that just have a ton of questions on their mind. So
senior
it's kind of cool.
And what kind of questions are they coming out with? Like they're at the same sort of time in their career, and they haven't
the same type of
some of
the senior ones are just more so thanking me for sharing my story, because they feel the same way I do, but they don't feel comfortable in sharing their story. And then the newer dispatchers, either they'll tell me, any of the stresses that they're going through in their own centers, or the new ones that are up and coming that are going through classes, like the testing process, the interview process, what to do when they're finally hired. Like, and, I tell them, the basic stuff, take your notes, pay attention, don't socialize, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So I kind of get a good spectrum of different dispatchers, which is kind of cool.
Where do you both want to take these platforms in the future, and now the podcast too? But what if you mentioned if you would be uncensored, you could really grow. But what do you want what do you want your message to be? I guess overall, whether it's Facebook or Instagram or the podcast, what is your message?
Yeah, I think the theme, it's the same thing that's on the wristbands I passed around. It's faith, family, and freedom. I'm not afraid to say I'm a Christian out there. And I think in this job, especially with all the stresses we deal with, you have to have some sort of foundational belief system. Mm-hmm. For me, it's God. And then I also believe wholeheartedly that you have to have a healthy family life. If your family life is sullied, it translates to work. So I think having a healthy family situation is healthy for your profession as well. And then obviously the freedom part comes in. For people, a lot of people have different personal meanings about freedom, but for me, it's the fact that I come from an immigrant family, and I'm able to do a job that a lot of people wish they could do, and I'm lucky enough to have said that I've done this for 20 years, and God willing, I'm going to retire doing it and have a lot of stories to tell at the end of it. So it's just me sharing stories along the way. When I first started out, I was doing a lot of wacky things, and so I think where I see this ending is with the launch of our podcast. I have a lot to say, and sometimes I dominate the mic, but I think the podcast is a natural progression for me. I'm 42 now. Mm-hmm. I'm in the process to test for lieutenant, and I just can't be doing the Kiki challenge and falling out of cars anymore for laughs as readily as I was able to do. So I think that's the natural evolution for me now. I had a good run doing some slapstick comedy, but there's a lot of people out there that are younger and doing it better now. That are really creative, and they've had a longer leash, and I'm just at the point in my life and the stage in my life where I think I'm better suited behind the mic, mm-hmm. and speaking candidly about subjects and answering questions and helping mentor and develop younger officers, as opposed to trying to hang on to being that young officer.
Yeah. So 2 questions, and then I'll ask Kristen the same too.
Okay.
What social media account or star would you most like to collab with? Doesn't have to be a law enforcement officer. Anyone out there?
I kind of went googly-eyed when I saw Taran Tactical downstairs. When Taran came down, my immediate thought was Keanu Reeves and Halle Berry. Yeah. I'm a big fan of the John Wick movies, and they had a hand in training that I actually had full responsibility in training their tactics and movement. And if you follow them on social media, they're the real deal. Halle Berry and Keanu Reeves. Yeah. They can manipulate weapon systems like seasoned veterans.
Yeah,
better than seasoned veterans.
Just to explain too for people, the Taran Tactical has a tent downstairs at this event here that we're doing live at ProForce, and I did the same thing. I walked up and was like, "All right, I gotta ask," and I'm sure you get asked this all the time: Is he nice? Is kind of nice, and is he as good a shot as he looks like he is on YouTube? And oh yeah. He's the nicest guy ever, and he's a great shot.
You can't fake. I mean, when it's on, that's the beauty about social media too. When it's recorded, you can't fake that stuff. I
always wonder, is that his 20th time through, and he's just, it's just,
Is it take 1 or take 100?
Right, exactly. Yeah. I said, no, he's legit. He's legit.
All right, legit.
So that's okay. So those guys for social media, but what guest for the podcast? Who would you, if you could have anybody on? Who would you have?
Unicorn Dreamin'.
Unicorn Dreamin'.
Yep, that's sorry, girl stuff. Yeah, it's the biggest person you could ever think of.
Yeah,
that relates to your audience.
I would. For me personally, I would love to have the president. I think he's such a polarizing figure, and everybody, I don't care what country you're in, you're talking about Donald Trump right now. And whether you like him as a person, mm-hmm. Or don't like him as a person, I think he's a very effective president, and I think he brings a lot of out-of-the-box methods into what he's doing, and everything he does is intentional. Even the gaffes that he does on Twitter, mm-hmm. Being a public relations guy, I wholeheartedly believe it's all intentional, and there's a method behind what he does. Whether it's to stir up controversy, because in the public relations world, bad controversy, good controversy,
There's no such thing as bad public relations, right?
Exactly.
Or bad media, bad coverage.
Yeah, and if you take him back to the 20s and when the early pioneers of public relations were emerging, he's going back to the fundamentals, and he's doing it from such a large platform. It's just the public relations geek in me personally would like to meet him and just pick his brain.
Interesting answer. Kristen, how about you? Who would you want to have on the show?
I don't know. I mean, crazy thing, I guess, because we do touch on health and fitness, so I'd love to have The Rock on.
I was actually thinking that.
Yeah, it'd be cool to have him. I mean, I'm more like celebrity person, so I also like Chris Pratt, because I know he supports law enforcement too.
He's very, very pro law enforcement.
Yeah, so that would be, his brother's the officer.
Is he? Oh,
yeah. Mm-hmm. So that'd be kind of cool to have him on too. And then as far as the podcast goes, I mean, it would be cool too to take ours on the road a little bit. And I have a bus, so I wanted to take my bus out and use that as like our recording area.
Recording studio.
Yeah. So that would be kind of cool to do that.
That would be very cool.
Yeah.
Where can people find out more about both of you and your social media accounts, and also then the podcast? Direct them to.
So the podcast is on. We only have an Instagram account for the podcast, so that's it. The 911. I'm sorry, the _911 strong _ podcast. And then I'm primarily only on Instagram as well under Dispatcher Kristen. And then we all know Aram.
Or do we? Where do they find you?
Yeah, if they want to listen to the podcast, they're on YouTube. We're on YouTube. We have a video portion of it, but we're also on Spotify, Google Play, Apple Podcasts, and Stitcher. And for me, if you want to follow me on social media, it's 911 Strong. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and
Twitter?
I don't really mess with Twitter. I haven't figured out Twitter. But I am really enjoying TikTok. I just started TikTok. And as much as I resisted going on there, and I wish I was earlier to the game, but I personally believe TikTok is going to be the next Instagram. I think what Instagram did to Facebook, TikTok's going to do to Instagram. And it's funny because I've immersed myself into an audience world where it's largely 8 to 16-year-olds that dominate that market on TikTok. But in about 5 to 10 years, those 10 to 16-year-olds will be the young adults that are on Instagram today. So it's important. If you're looking to start on social media and you want to be a big player in the influencer world, I would say TikTok is a neutral playing ground right now where you can absolutely make that mark and get to there in about 2 or 3 years.
It's funny. We're the same age, and this is only like the second time I've heard of TikTok, and the first time was only because one of my millennial officers was showing me his.
I thought you were going to say your kids were on it.
No, not quite yet.
My kids are on it.
Not quite yet. Mine's still a little young. Well, thank you both for being here. We'll put show notes, and we'll put all the links to everything that you talked about here. We'll put those into the show notes, so if someone's driving or unavailable to check it out at the moment, they can go to thesquadron.net, find this episode, and then all the links will be there as well. So Thanks for being here. Thanks for taking part in this experiment of a live podcast event here at ProForce. So best of luck to both of you, and as you continue to grow, I think the message you send, the humor, is absolutely important. That is, I 100% agree with you that the way to reach people who may otherwise dislike us is through humor. We're not going to convince them to come with us through any other means or other than connection with that commonality, that one common denominator in all humors is laughter and humor, right?
Absolutely.
So thank you both for being here.
Thanks for having
pleasure.
us.